Morning.
Good morning.
Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Morning, everyone.
I see Councillor with it just connecting here, and then we will get going. There he is. Morning, Councillor.
Morning.
I am going to call the meeting to order and confirm that we have quorum, and we have regrets from Councillor Schumacher for this meeting this morning. And we will start by having Councillor Thompson read the land acknowledgement statement.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I would like to respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe under the terms of the Robinson-Huron Treaty, number 61 of 1850, and the Williams Treaty of 1923. We commit to acknowledge, learn, educate, create opportunity, honor sacred places, and take actions toward real truth and reconciliation in support of our commitment to walking the path together in respect, peace, and harmony for future generations.
Thank you for that. I have a resolution moved by Councillor Stone, seconded by Councillor Wiebe. It is recommended that the special general committee meeting agenda dated Monday, November 29th, 2021 be adopted as printed and circulated. All in favor? That carries. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, I will now ask Councillor Thompson to assume the chair for this portion of the Operations and Protective Services budget discussion.
All right, thank you, Your Worship. Happy to do so. We have moved by Councillor Armour, seconded by Mayor Terziano, recommended that draft 2022 Operations and Protective Services operating budget as attached to Report Corp 2021-84 be included in the town draft 2022 consolidated budget for consideration. And I think this is where Riva steps in to take over. And I think what we'll do here, committee, is the different sections of this. So we'll go through each one, and then at the end of each section, we'll open it up for discussions or questions at that point, if that works for everyone. Let's do it that way. And Riva, are you ready to go?
I am. Thank you, Chair Thompson. So I do have a presentation to share. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Okay. Okay, so we're here today to review the Operations and Protective Services Draft 2022 Divisional Budget. So this draft divisional budget is being put forward by the Budget Working Group, and that consists of the senior management team and myself. The initial budget submission was prepared by the Operations and Protective Services leadership team and their staff, who have done an excellent job of budgeting for what they need to maintain current service levels throughout the division. So I really did want to thank Director Hernan and his staff for all the hard work and attention to detail that went into putting this budget together. So there are two main things that are factored into the acceptable levy range that's determined in any given year. There's the allowable tax rate increase and the assessment growth that we're anticipating to realize. With respect to the tax rate increase, the Budget and Financial Controls Policy stipulates that the tax rate increase in any given year can be between CPI trim and 2 times CPI trim in July of that year. So for 2022, this meant a 3.1 to 6.2% tax rate increase. In August, this range was presented in the Budget Guidelines Report to General Committee. The range based on the policy was not approved, but rather replaced with a recommendation for staff to prepare the town consolidated 2022 draft budget with a tax rate increase of up to 4%. So now with respect to the assessment growth, MPAC was initially scheduled to release updated assessment data back in 2020, which was expected to result in significant assessment growth for 2021. Due to COVID-19, however, the release of this assessment was delayed. New information has been provided in the last couple of weeks that this release has now been delayed even further, and it's not expected to be released until 2023. So as a result, only the assessment changes related to new growth will be realized in 2022. So based on information that's been provided to us by MPAC, this new growth realized in 2022 is actually just over $107 million. This information was used to calculate a maximum levy increase of about $1.12 million, and that's based on the 4% tax rate increase. So this was the maximum allowable increase, including capital and operating. The capital levy increase for 2022, which was previously approved by committee for inclusion in the draft budget, amounted to an increase of about $645,000. So this means that the working group was tasked with ensuring that an overall operating budget increase was no more than $475,000. The current draft budget does fall within this acceptable range. The current total levy increase for 2022 is approximately $978,000, and that's with a tax rate increase of 3.2%, which is within the 4% guidelines that were provided to staff. So this is showing a divisional budget summary. This is just for the Operations and Protective Services Division. So the total proposed Operations and Protective Service divisional budget net levy increase is about $773,000. This is made up mostly of capital increase of about $597,000 and about $176,000 increase in operating costs. Just to go through some of the significant changes within this division. So the capital levy contribution increase, which I mentioned earlier, is an increase of about $597,000. So this is made up of the $400,000 increase to the Public Works Capital Reserve. There's a $155,000 increase to the Fleet Reserve, about $40,000 increase in parks, and $1,500 in Cemetery Reserve. The fire capital contribution has remained consistent in 2021 because they currently have a well-funded reserve. There are a couple non-annual recurring projects included in this divisional budget. The first is the Bridge Needs Study. So this was done back in 2020, and it is required to be done every 2 years. So it's been included in the 2022 draft budget as well at a cost of about $20,000. The infield leveling project is included for $8,000. So this project is actually proposed to be funded through the Working Capital Reserve. So it doesn't have a 2022 net levy impact. So these project costs were included in the 2021 operating budget and funded through the levy. Due to the usage of the Macaulay fields being less than what was anticipated in 2021, this project did not need to be completed. So rather than including in the levy again, staff are proposing that this project be funded through the Working Funds Reserve. So there's also a one-time project related to software implementation for the fire department, and this is a cost of $3,500. So because this is a one-time project, it is proposed to be funded through the Working Funds Reserve as well. With respect to fuel costs, these have increased by about $94,000, and this is really just based on historical spending. So the operations staff undertook a review of the historical average usage in liters by each type of fuel used, and they costed accordingly in the 2022 budget. So it's really based on the actual usage in liters of the fuel at current year pricing. So with respect to SWB, or salaries, wages, and benefits, there were a number of items that both impact the levy and don't impact the levy. So those items that do impact the levy include things like the COLA and statutory and employee benefit increases. And those are about $97,000 in total for the division. There's also a union increase per our union agreement, and that was about $36,000 for 2022. So these two items are actually offset with reductions, both in volunteer firefighter costs and in overtime costs. So those reductions totaled about $54,000. So with respect to SWB changes that do not impact the 2022 levy, there were 2 position overlaps that were presented to committee back in September. And these were for the Director of Operations and Protective Services, as well as the Municipal Corridor Advisor position. So these overlaps total about $56,000, and they're proposed to be funded through the Human Capital Reserve. So the only other SWB change that does not impact the levy is the addition of some RTC instructor costs. So the Regional Training Center for the fire department has some instructor costs. So these are anticipated to be covered through the registration fees. And the total SWB related to the instructor costs are about $60,000. There was also an increase in snow removal revenues of about $17,000 and revenues related to aggregate resource fees. So those increased by about $10,000. So overall in transit, we're looking at an increase of about $31,000. So this is mainly due to enhanced cleaning that's required on the bus as a result of COVID-19 and some annual contract costing increases. So with respect to the internal fleet leases, since 2018, there's been 1 lease between the fleet and building departments. And this was for the usage of a vehicle that was purchased by the fleet reserve. Previous to that, the building department had purchased the majority of their vehicles, which is why there was no leases for those. So in 2021, one of the building department vehicles was replaced and a new lease was established. So we went from having 1 lease to 2 leases in 2021. For 2022, it is anticipated that a 3rd building department vehicle will be under lease with fleet. So these leases take into account things, so operating costs, things like oil changes, tire changes, repairs and maintenance. There's also a capital component to ensure that the fleet capital reserve is funded for the future replacement of these lease vehicles. So in 2022, there is an additional $14,000 in internal lease revenue that's anticipated from the building department. Approximately 10,000 of that relates to capital and will be directed into that fleet capital reserve. So overall, there is a net levy reduction related to these leases of approximately $4,000. So throughout some discussions with some of the committee members, this information was requested on, how are the operating costs being funded? So overall, in operations and protective services, the spending or the costs are about just under $7.7 million in 2022. So the majority of this is to be funded through the levy. You can see that the property tax is about $6.5 million with respect to this division. However, there are some specific other funding sources that should be noted. So revenues, this includes the internal allocations like the fleet leases, user fees, snow removal revenues, aggregate resource fees, transit fares, things like that. So we're anticipating about $820,000 in revenues to offset those costs. There's also the usage of development charges related to debenture payments. So this approach has been taken for a number of years now, and it's just under about $39,000. The provincial grants, that's the provincial transit grant of about $122,000 to offset those costs. So then there are various reserves. So reserves are used for very specific things. So the working funds is proposed to fund the one-time software implementation costs for the fire department. So that was $3,500, as I mentioned in the last slide. And there's also the infield leveling project that was carried forward from 2021. So that's $8,000. The Human Capital Reserve, as I mentioned previously, is proposed to fund the one-time position overlaps for the director and the Municipal Corridor Advisor. The Public Works Capital Reserve has been used in the past to fund a portion of the engineering technologist SWB costs, and a large portion of the work done by that position relates to capital projects. The Pittman's Bay Reserve is proposed to fund any repairs and maintenance costs required at Pittman's Bay. So annual contributions into this reserve are 75% of the revenues earned at Pitman's Bay. So the contributions into the reserve tend to outweigh the repairs and maintenance costs. So, and the last item on the list here is the Brunel locks. So that reserve is proposed to fund up to $2,500 related to horticultural costs. So this approach, again, has been taken for a number of years and has remained unchanged for 2022. So with respect to capital, overall, the capital spending in 2022 is anticipated to be about 6.6 million. Of this total project cost, only approximately 5.2 million is to be funded through capital reserves. The remaining amounts are to be funded through various grants, donations, deferred parkland, and other operating reserves like working funds and the Ontario Winter Games Legacy Fund. The net levy contributions to the capital reserves are just under 5 million, and there's 5.2 million in 2022 spending anticipated. So I wanted to specifically point out for the roads capital projects that we've been levying an additional $400,000 annually for the last several years. And this was per a mandate letter included in our strategic plan. So the mandate letter says that we levy the additional amounts until we get to a spend of $4.5 million annually. This spending target is anticipated to be reached in 2022. So even with this $400,000 increase annually, though, we've really only been levying enough to account for the annual spending. We haven't been saving any of this for future road projects. So I think this is a really excellent representation of the capital funding gap that we discussed last week during the draft capital budget presentation. So at this point, that's everything specifically that I wanted to go through with this presentation. And I am available for questions.
Okay, thank you, Ruben. I'm going to ask committee members, use your electronic hand if you have questions, and then we can refer back to those pages, Ruben, if we have to. Okay, any questions so far? It seems you're doing such an incredibly good job, Reba. No one has any questions, so let's sally forth. Oops, pardon me. We have a couple. First off, Mayor Terziano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Reba, you mentioned the working fund reserve. I believe you said is to be used to fund one-time items. I want to know if we actually have a policy that says that, because that's not something that I can actually remember ever discussing or setting up, or basically saying it is to fund one-time items. So I'm wondering if we have a policy on what working funds are to actually be used for.
Yep, through you, Chair Thompson. Thank you, Mayor Terziano. That was an excellent question. So I don't believe that there's anything specific in our reserve policy that says that the working funds reserve needs to be used exclusively for one-time items. That being said, using the working funds to offset annual costs really is just deferring the levy impact, right? So if we were to fund, say, our fuel costs through the working funds reserve or our increase in fuel, unless we do that every year and we dip into that reserve every year, it's going to eventually impact the levy, which is why, kind of from a finance perspective, we've deemed it prudent to really use that for one-time specific items that would only impact 1 year of the levy. Right? It's used more as a stabilization reserve, and rather than trying to fund annual things through it, because then we just keep dipping into it. And I don't know if Director McKenzie wants to add anything to that, or
if I might follow up, Mr. Chair, just I understand the one-time items versus it being used for ongoing operating expenses. I guess my understanding was it was a reserve to be used to fund emergencies, things that come up, not to actually reduce the levy. So I guess that's where I'm going with my question.
Julie, did you have anything to add to that?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Thompson. So just in our policy, it does indicate that the working funds may be used at council's discretions for emergencies, unanticipated economic downturns, and one-time opportunities with expiry dates that fall within the current approved budget cycle. And minimum balances shall be restored in the following year to a maximum of 5 years. So we have hit the minimum, that last part, but I believe that's what we're talking about, that just the one-time opportunities where we can offset the levy with those items that are one time in the budget year.
Thank you, Julie. Councillor Weeb.
Thank you, Chair Thompson. I guess this question I think is to Steve. I'm wondering how, from a capital perspective, equipment perspective, how well we are, what shape we're in terms of for the fire department to mitigate forest fire risk. I'm wondering if there's any, if much thought has been given to that, and if we're set in terms of what we would need equipment-wise, or is it something that we just couldn't prepare for because it would be too big and we'd have to rely on outside forces. So I wonder if you could speak to that element.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Thompson. Regards to the fire department with the forest fires, we don't see the forest fires that you see in Northern Ontario. We have a mixed hardwood bush. That's one thing to keep in mind. So we won't get the high crowning fires that you see in Northern Ontario. The fire department is well equipped to deal with the light ground scrub fires. And we do have signed agreements with the Ministry of Natural Resources that if at any time we feel they're out of our control or out of our scope or capabilities, we can bring the Ministry of Natural Resources in, and they'll dictate and put what necessary resources to it. And I think you're referring more to water bombers, because that's the big piece of equipment that we don't own. Obviously the M&R does, and they're readily available to us. We actually have an agreement with the M&R now. If you look at the fire budget, we bring in approximately $5,000 a year, because we do look after some of the crown land now for the Ministry of Natural Resources as a responsibility. So the fire department is well equipped. The fire risk is relatively low compared to Northern Ontario. And you know, we've got built up areas, we've got access, so we can get to most areas of the community. A few spots maybe up in the early area where it's a little tougher to get to, but there's not too many people in those areas, and people are what cause those fires, and for the most part. So to answer your question, the fire department is well equipped and well staffed, and has the necessary agreements in place if additional equipment is required.
Before we get to you, Deputy Mayor Alcock, I noticed that CAO Corey did have her hand up a moment ago, and I wonder, did you have something to add, Denise?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just going to, with respect to Mayor Truziano's question about funding sources, just a reminder to committee that this is simply a recommendation from the senior management team with respect to the operation and capital budget. So if committee desires not to fund those items from the recommended sources, it's absolutely the call of committee. So it was just a recommendation that it be funded from those sources. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor Alcock.
Thank you, Chair Thompson. Hold on, sorry. Sorry about that. I have a very quick question, and it's a similar question about funding sources. And I know, Reva, you explained it, but I'm not sure I quite understood. And that was with respect to funding human capital through reserves. And is that an unusual approach? It just seemed different for me. So maybe if you could once again go over the rationale for doing that.
Reva?
And sorry about my background noise.
Reva?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Alcock. So the Human Capital Reserve, it used to be called the SWB Reserve. I don't know if that kind of puts a little bit perspective. So essentially, that reserve is used to fund one-time salary, wages, and benefits costs. So the use of that fund in 2022 is for those position overlaps. So for the Director of Operations and Protective Services, there's a 1-month overlap that was proposed in the September SWB budget report. So that is anticipated to be funded through that reserve because it's a one-time cost. We're going to have that overlap position for 1 month. And then the Municipal Corridor Advisor is the other position, and that is currently in the budget for a 4-month overlap. And again, that because it's a one-time, because it's a one-time cost, we felt it prudent to fund that through the SWB reserve or the Human Capital Reserve, as opposed to increasing the levy specific for that amount. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. I guess my thought was that it in fact is an increase to SWB, and but if it is one time, I think I understand the rationale. Okay, thanks.
Okay, Julie, did you have, I see you nodding your head. Did you have something to add to that?
Thank you, Chair Thompson. No, I was just agreeing with about the one-time items, and it is specified in our policy, our reserve policy, that it's a reserve to provide funding for organizational human resources. So that would be one-time things, or in year if we need funds for human resources.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Terziano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Probably a question for Steve. In our capital piece, I believe we have 4 new service trucks identified for this year. We had 6 last year. Did we purchase 6 last year? And if so, are we planning to have 10 brand new trucks on the road? And what percentage of that what percentage is 10 of our service vehicles, and where will they be used?
Okay, to start with, we did purchase 6 last year. I believe one of them was a 3/4 ton. We had a carryover from the previous year. So in 21, we bought 6. In 20, we had planned to buy trucks. We couldn't get them with COVID hit and everything went. So that's why you've seen an uptake in 21 of 6 trucks. We are planning on replacing 4 service trucks this year. The way we run the fleet, a truck has 2 lives. It spends its first 5 years, if you will, as an administrative vehicle. Someone like myself or Kevin or a building inspector or a bylaw vehicle is used for the first 5 years of its life. The next 5 years of its life, it turns into what we call a service vehicle. It's given to the crews, park crews, road crews, wherever it might be. So although you'll see in the budget, we might be slating to replace a parks truck or a roads maintenance truck, the reality is they will be getting a hand-me-down, and the new truck will be coming into the fleet, going to administrative purposes, if you will. Gives us a better use of the vehicle. The administrative put a lot of mileage on. They don't physically abuse the truck, if you will, with the cold mix, with the equipment in them. The service crews, if you will, and abuse isn't the right word, they use them harder, if you will. So if we just buy new vehicles for roads crews and parks crews, we won't get much more than about 6 years out of them, and they're no longer roadworthy. This way, we're getting a full 10 years out of them. We are planning on replacing 4 vehicles next year, and I believe Kevin is just pulling some numbers up for me. We will get you back the exact total. It's in our capital plan. I think we have approximately 30 administrative vehicles, but I'll get you the exact number. That includes everything: bylaw, building, parks, roads, Pioneer Village, but I'll get you the exact number on administrative vehicles.
Thanks. I never would have guessed we had as many as 30, so that'll be interesting to know.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Oh, Councillor Withy, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is a lot of vehicles being replaced over this period of time. What are your projections for the future? Is this going to keep happening at this rate in the years to come, or are we making a significant upgrade to a large portion of the fleet now that we won't see in the next couple of years? Or
Steve?
Yeah, maybe I could ask Riva to pull up the fleet capital plan for the next 10 years. And it'd show how it's how we're spacing it out. We're actually we've just finished 2 or 3 years of approximately $1 million spend on fleet, and we're starting to see those numbers come down now. We do have a large fleet. We've got 10 large plow trucks. You know, we're running 4 sidewalk sanders, if you will. We've got road construction equipment, but we've tried to balance it out. And if Riva could pull up the most current sheet and share the screen, I'd be happy to walk you through it.
Riva?
Sorry, I'm just pulling it up. It's taking a little bit of time to come up. Okay. Can everybody see?
Yeah, that looks good, Reba. I can read that fine, and it's small on my screen, but I think I can read it fine. Steve, did you want to go on from there?
Yeah, Riva, do you have the spreadsheet that shows the 5-year summary? Perfect. Could you click on the 5-year summary? And
So it's more light duty vehicles.
it's more of the light duty vehicles is what you're looking at there. So basically the plan over the next 5 years, as you can see, so in 2022, we're planning on spending, I'm sorry, Riva, your cursor's right in the way, I can't see, $860,000. And that's made up of heavy duty vehicles. That 325 would be 1 plow truck. Light duty machinery, that is 2 of your sidewalk machines. And then you see your light duty vehicles, if you will, and that is the 4 service trucks. When you look at 2023, and maybe Riva, if you can jump back to the other, actually, before you jump there, if you look at 2023, our spend is down to about 515,000. In 2024, we're predicting 575. 2025, we're predicting 450. I can tell you in each of those years, you're going to see a big plow truck at that 325 number. Can you jump back to the other sheet, Riva, where we can look at?
Yeah, so this is 2023.
That's the side we need right there.
There are 2 vehicles in here. And these are from 2010.
Yeah, can you swing left? I guess I should have maybe opened this file up so I could have maneuvered it. I apologize for that. We're missing something in this year.
In 2023?
But yeah, this isn't the spreadsheet I was thinking about. Kevin, look at the other spreadsheet there. Swing left. You're showing a light vehicle truck at 250,000. That number doesn't sound right.
That was in 2024.
Okay.
So in
Let me find the
2024,
sheet I'm looking for.
there were 4 service trucks, and
It's in my file folder. Transfer. Kevin's. I think it's opening. It's read only.
Stephen,
Yes.
is this something we could come back to a little bit later on if it takes some time to get this information together?
I've actually got it right now if I'm allowed to share my screen.
You go right ahead, sir.
All right. Just one we're a little more familiar with looking at, so it makes it a little easier for us to grab it quickly. Hide. Move that one out of the way. Okay, so in 2022, what we're planning on, as we indicated, is a large combo plow truck, 2 of the sidewalk machines, and you'll see the half tons, the smaller vehicles there. One is slated right now as a cemetery service truck, and it looks like 2 parks trucks. Like I say, they will not be getting the new vehicles. They will be going to admin, and there'll be some hand-me-downs coming that way. And then there is one also for the building department. The building department, we do a lease back with them just because of the way they're funded, but there'll be another vehicle purchase for the building department. In 2023, we're looking at 2 service vehicles again, smaller trucks. What do we have here? We have a Kubota RTV, and we have some radio system work that's going to be done on vehicles as well in that year. As well, we have the cold patch truck is slated for replacing in 2023. It's classified as a medium truck, and we have a plow truck in there. And I'd be happy to send this sheet out. It's what we work with, but you can see when you look at the plow trucks, you're basically buying 1 plow truck every year. We have 10 of them. They're a 10-year life expectancy. So you see another plow truck in 24, 25. You're seeing one. You'll see one up here in 26, I'm sure. 26, 27, 28, it's pretty standard. The other equipment falls within this plan, and I'd be happy to share the plan. I'd be happy to spend much more detail if you want, going over exactly the truck numbers and which one's going to which location. Kevin tells me that we have just over 20 small vehicles. To answer that question, I said 30 originally. I was wrong. It's closer to 20 smaller vehicles, but we'll get you the exact number for that.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Mayor Terziano, you've got your real hand up.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't think I could get my electronic up before you moved on, but just follow up. So we're actually going to have over the course of 2 years, 10 new service vehicles out of 20 on the road. And the reason I dwell on it is, what does that do to our plan going forward? We are then going to have to replace 10 vehicles over 2 years in about 5 years again. We kind of lost our replacing a couple a year.
Yeah, and through you, Mayor Terziano, we do see some spikes like that up and down. But we can go through the entire plan. You've also got a rubber tire excavator in there, which would be a $300,000 item you replace every 10 or 12 years. I'm sure we've spaced it out in such a way that we're not buying half tons at the same year we're doing that. But you know, they're older vehicles. They're requiring a lot of service, and they're just due for replacement. If you want us to hold off on a couple, we certainly could. It just means that they're just pushed forward to the next year.
Steve, if I recall correctly, it was about 3-4 years ago that we realized that our fleet was in bad condition, and that was the reason at that point I think we made a major purchase towards fleet, which is one of the reasons for that bump. Plus, I think, as you said, in 2020, we couldn't get trucks or whatever it was. So I think that was a council decision at that point, if I recall correctly, to upgrade the fleet to get everything to that point where we did have that 10-year lifespan for vehicles.
You are correct, Councillor Thompson. We had to buy a couple of years. We had multiple plow trucks. We had $650,000 spends because we were buying 2 of them. We've now tried to get it down to a balance where we're buying 1 every year to try and spread that cost out, so we're not seeing the peaks and valleys, if you will. We're doing our best to try and manage this budget so that we can get a consistent number across the bottom on spend. Yeah, when you're buying a grader that year, you're going to be backing off on other equipment. You know, unfortunately, we've got 2 sidewalk machines that we've been pushing too long, 2005 and 2007, and they're now slated both to be purchased next year. And we talked about that we recognize that 10, 12 years from now, we'll be looking at 2 old machines again. But because we were putting our efforts in other equipment, you know, I won't say we ignored these. We dragged these ones along as far as we possibly could, but now it's time to replace 2 of them.
Okay, I think we flogged this one to death. Riva, let's go on to the next panel.
Through you, Chair Thompson, I actually didn't have any other items to go over for this budget.
I see Julia pulling up her hand. Julia, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going through to put up my electronic hand because that's what you told us to do. I just wanted to follow up with Mayor Terziano and just see if that answered her questions. I think in general, we have about 25 pickup trucks in our fleet. I don't know if there was any other questions that you had on that one.
Yep. Mayor Terziano?
I actually have a different question. I didn't think that we had done the whole department. I thought we were now going on to parks, but I guess we did everything all in one. Is that what you're telling me? Okay, so I did have a question pertaining to the parks, and I was waiting. So the movement of funds for the snowplow operators or sidewalk operators, we have an addition of the 148,000, I think it was, in the Parks SWB, but I can't find the reduction in the Public Works piece. So, I mean, there's some detail in SWB, but there's not a ton of detail. So maybe somebody can point out that $148,000 reduction in that budget when we move that money around.
Riva?
So thank you, Chair Thompson. So to you, Mayor Terziano. So within the roads and fleet budget, overall, the budget change is about a reduction of 31,000. So that includes a number of things. There was the reduction of about 148 for the movement to the parks budget for those winter operations. There was also the COLA increase, the union increase. All of those things were kind of all included in that. So overall, there's a reduction. It's a little bit hard to see in that specific line item that it's made up of a number of different things. But yes, the 148,000 has been reduced in the roads and fleet department and moved over to the parks department. So in Appendix A attached to the report, there are some department summaries. So I believe it's on, let's say, page 9 of Appendix A. You know, there's the, sorry, just reading my, there's a reduction in overtime costs of 21,000. And you know, I'm going to share my screen so you can see specifically the page that I'm looking at. I'll make this bigger. So this is specific for roads and fleet. So you can see there are a number of SWB changes in here. So there's a reduction in overtime. There's the overlap of the municipal corridor advisor position, the overlap of the director of operations position. There's a union increase. There is the reduction in parks winter operations. And there's also the COLA increase. So it's kind of all of those things combined to form that $33,000 reduction. So it is in there. Stop sharing my screen so I can see everyone.
Okay, anyone else? Any other questions with regards to this? Julia?
I'm just gonna really quickly, just Karen, if you're looking in FMW, you can see in the winter control budget, you'll see that the SWB number is significantly reduced, and that's that offset between that and the parts.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, I read the resolution, I guess about 45 minutes ago. I'm going to repeat it because we do have to vote on it. So moved by Councillor Armour, seconded by Mayor Terziano. It is recommended that the draft 2022 Operations and Protective Services operating budget is attached to Report Corp 2021-84 be included in the town draft 2022 consolidated budget for consideration. Comments? Mayor, did you have your hand up? Was that a mistake?
Well, I don't know. Yeah, I'm going to make a comment, I guess. It's hard because we're doing this in pieces and we still have the other departments to do it. But overall, when I go through this budget, and this isn't just public works, but I think it's a comment worth making. If we take the things that we're funding through the working reserve, which I don't believe is a fund to reduce the levy, just in order to present budget. The same for the human capitals. We're using that to just reduce the levy, and the safe restart money. And if I add all of those up, it's about $773,000. So for me, this 3.2% tax increase is really closer to about a 6% tax increase because we're using other funds to keep the levy low. So for me, I don't think we've done a good enough job, and that's not specific to public works, but I think the tax increase of 997,000 is misleading. I think our tax increase, if we didn't have a working fund and a human capital and safe start money, would be about $1.6 million. So I'm not too supportive of this at this point. That's just my comment.
Deputy Mayor Alcock.
Thank you, Chair Thompson. I'm just looking at, and I should have asked this before, but I actually, and again, I apologize if I missed it. I was looking at the parks and trails, and there's a substantial increase in SWB from 2021 to 2022. And under full-time, it was 348,000 and now it's 513,000. And is that a direct correlation to we coming out of a COVID year, and so we're going back to what we were at a base level from before, or am I misreading that?
Riva?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Alcock. So that's actually the winter operations that in 2021 in the budget, it was included in the roads and fleet department. And now in the 2022 budget, we've reallocated it to where it really should be. So you'll see there was a reduction, a significant reduction in the winter control budget sheet for within roads and fleet. And there's the offsetting increase in parks and trails. So that's specific for that amount. And if I could, Mr. Chairman, just address Mayor Terziano's comments as well. So with respect to the working capital and the working funds and human capital funding. So this approach is really nothing new. So in the past, the human capital reserve has been used to fund one-time type SWB fluctuations in order, and it is used as a stabilization reserve essentially. So yes, it is reducing the overall net levy, but that's kind of the approach that's been taken for several years. And with working funds, it's sort of the same situation. Yes, it is used to fund emergency expenses and to fund those one-time type things in order to keep that levy at a reasonable level and not, and not have these huge fluctuations. So that's the whole purpose of those two types of reserves is they are meant as levy sort of stabilization reserves. And the approach really has been the same for as long as I've seen it, and I understand for well before I've been here. So I'm hoping that kind of addresses your concerns, and that we really haven't done anything new in the 2022 budget with respect to funding those types of things.
Did you want to add anything to that?
Just along that same line, just with the COVID recovery funding. So we did get that money back in 2020. That was when it was announced. The whole time we've been reporting that our intention would be to use it in the 2022 budget to help offset those operating pressures. The purpose of that fund, I'll just read it just The first part is to help municipalities respond to ongoing and unprecedented 2021 COVID operating pressures. While the actual extent of municipal impacts for 2021 are uncertain at this time, the province expects this funding will help municipalities to continue to deliver high quality local services to its residents and businesses rely on, as well as help municipalities proceed with planned capital projects. The town is accountable for using these funds for the purpose of addressing your priority COVID operating costs and pressures. And it also says that if we don't use it in 2021, then we need to put it in a reserve for 2022. So the approach that we have taken on this is that we're using this funds to help offset the operating pressures of the town so that we can keep a lower tax rate for our taxpayers. So that is the way that we are approaching those funds. We've been really good at managing our costs for COVID. Every time we've had to reduce programs, we've offset the related expenses for those. So we don't have specific COVID expenses that we haven't been able to kind of mitigate. So we have been the intention that we have all along is to use that funds for 2022 to help offset our tax rate. So if anybody has any questions on that part.
Mayor Terziano?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I certainly get what you're talking about, offsetting the pressures. I guess my concern is that we didn't identify any of those pressures really. We've just used it as a lump sum to reduce the levy, and which means that really what you brought back to us is a levy increase greater than the 3.2%, because if we didn't have that funding to offset it, our levy would be higher. So I have a little bit of a hard time with that piece. And the other piece is that we're using it to reduce the levy. And I'm concerned if we have a full plan for 2022 if COVID isn't gone, because every day I get up, it looks more and more like it's not going to be gone. So can we manage 2022 without any cushion whatsoever, like the 400,000 of COVID funding?
Who would like that, Reba or?
I was just going to clarify. So, Mayor Terziano, you said, can we manage 2022? Is that with COVID? Is that? I think just going back over the past, since 2020, we've been reporting on all of our expenses and our revenues. I believe last year we brought about 8 reports back. This year we have about 2. But from what I've seen, our municipality has been doing an excellent job at mitigating and responding to the changes due to COVID. Was there?
I don't disagree. That we have done an amazing job through it. I'm just saying we now have spent all of our eggs. Have we looked at what we could be faced with in 2022? And are we confident that we can manage it without any further assistance from the government? Because we've used ours all up.
Okay, before we go any further, our CAO has raised her hand. I realize you were after Councillor Withy, but Councillor Withy, you'll take second fiddle to our CAO in this particular case. Denise, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it is in response to Mayor Terziano's comments. With respect to the budget that we prepared for 2022, we have prepared a budget to the best of our knowledge that will allow us to provide the services that Council has set within our community. And as Mayor Terziano alluded to, the numbers are slightly frightening. We see that they're continually going up. I spent the weekend having multiple conversations with the operators of the assessment center and the vaccination center, and we're going to have to start ramping things up there. So we don't know at this point in time, but what I can assure you is that as COVID potentially changes, hopefully gets better, or if it does continue to get worse, that we will adjust our operations accordingly. So we did that in 2021, and you'll see that in the surplus numbers that came forward in the third quarter report, that where we couldn't provide services, we also reduced our expenses. So it's not something we're proud of to say that we've come forward with that surplus, but I think it's an indication that staff did a really good job managing the requirements of providing those services during a pandemic. So I don't think I can actually answer your question, Mayor Terziano. What I can assure you is we prepared a budget to the best of our knowledge, And if things change because of COVID, then we will have to adjust our operations accordingly. And we will make sure that where possible, we reduce expenses when the revenues aren't coming in. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So you're saying that we can be as fluid as we need to be then, CAO. Okay, Councillor Withey, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do believe that the mayor has brought up a valid concern, though. I mean, we're looking at spending of over $7 million at this time, using up that money. I really think that that's a large amount of money to be spending under our current environment. Sure, we don't know what's coming at us. Indications aren't great, but that's a lot of spending and using up all that stuff. And this is, of course, no comment about how we've handled this in the past. I think we've done an excellent job. I need to add that. But this is a huge spend that we're looking at for this year. And to use up all of that money to offset this, to sort of bring down where we're looking at an acceptable increase, I don't think it's not lost on me what the mayor said. I mean, I think we've really got to take a closer look on all the spending and what we're actually setting ourselves up for in the future if there's no COVID money coming or other things going to happen. I'm very concerned about what I'm looking at right now.
Thank you, Councillor. Julia.
Thank you, Chair Thompson. Sorry, I was blowing my hand. I just wanted to mention too that the purpose of this meeting is for council to be able to ask the questions and to look at the information. And certainly, if there's any suggestions that the councillors do have, we welcome you guys to bring those forward at this meeting, and then we can look at that. And then when we bring back the draft budget, it will be included in that. So this is directly related to operations and protective services, this discussion. So if you are looking at the budget for this division and you do have any suggestions for change, we welcome you to bring those forward now, and then we'll take a look at that. So when we come back on the 15th with the full budget, those changes will be incorporated into there.
Yeah, just a reminder, committee, that this resolution is for consideration. Okay, so that's the purpose of what we're doing here today. Councillor Armour.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Thompson. Just more of a comment than anything else. When I review this, I'm just glad to see that we're using all the different types of funding sources available to us. Because as it is draft, and going forward, if something does happen with COVID, if it increases numbers, then we can always obviously go back and change what we have to change and save money where we need to save money. But as we say, this is a draft, and I'm just glad to see them using all the funding sources they have available to them.
Okay, thank you, Council. Thank you, Committee. I don't see any other hands up. So you heard the resolution. All those in favor? And opposed? It carries. Okay, thank you very, very much, everyone. And that's the end of my involvement with this particular meeting. So back to you, Mayor Terziano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I have nothing to do except read a motion to adjourn now. So moved by Deputy Mayor Alcock and seconded by Councillor Fitzgerald. Is recommended that we do now adjourn at 9:58 a.m. All in favor? And that carries. And a reminder that we will be back here at 1 o'clock for the next segment.